It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? What's happening? That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman, and we got a game to talk about, week 2, Logan, and it is going to be a good one. Out in Denver, Commanders and Broncos, our preview podcast here on Take Command. And again, don't forget, the Take Command pregame show comes at you for even more preview right before the game, 3 hours before kick each and every weekend, live on the Team 980 and 106.7 The Fan, streaming live on our YouTube pages as well. We'll be live at Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor at 1 o'clock this Sunday. But Logan, for the pod, let's dive right in. Offense first for the Commanders against a very talented Broncos defense. Vance Joseph, the former Broncos head coach, is the coordinator, and they've got some real talent, especially up front.
Yeah, I mean, they're talented kind of throughout the defense. Like, it's so funny. Like, when you watch, like when I was prepping for Arizona, you're like, man, this defense in the preseason is pretty good. And then you watch Denver against against Las Vegas. And it just felt like the speed of the group upticked a little bit. And, it's a divisional game. It's hard to know, like everyone gets up for those games a little bit more. But, yeah, man, like let's just start with the back end of that group. They've got some really, really talented pieces. I think like Patrick Surtain, like probably right now is one of the top 5 corners in the NFL. He matched up with Adams from Las Vegas and kind of, I don't want to say shut him down because you're never going to shut him down completely, but was in his pocket the whole day. And then I think that was something that I was a little surprised about is how just dexterous he was with his coverage. And then the safety, man, Justin Simmons is an absolute unit, bro. Like, I didn't realize he was that big. He's 6'2", he's like 205. There's a couple where like Jacoby Myers is coming to crack him on runs, and he is like, no, thank you, bro. Shoulder down, like bang, big hit. And I didn't know this, but he's had 20 interceptions over the last 4 years.
So makes sense to me. I was playing my franchise mode in Madden, and he had 4 against me.
Wow. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so not a good time.
So he's a guy that is, arguably he's top 3 safety in the NFL. Yeah, very, very good football player. And so like when you see those two guys, you're like, man, that's a different kind of caliber. Obviously, at the other safety spot is Kareem Jackson. Kind of, I don't want to say he's a good, solid guy, but nothing like crazy. And then the guy that I think
for a long time.
Yeah, the guy that I think is really interesting is Damari Mathis. So Damari Mathis is the other corner. He's number 27. And like I said, Surtain kind of matched Adams the whole game. And Damari was the guy kind of on Jacoby, and Jacoby torched him. So I look at this team, this offense, and I'm saying, like, how do you find 27 as often and as frequently as possible, especially given the receiver depth? Now, I don't know if Surtain's going to match Terry because, I think they're aware that Terry's not 100%. I think you could see that in last week's game when he's running around. But, man, if you get Jahan Dotson on 27, like, let that man cook. Like, he should catch 20 balls. Demurray's a fine pro. He's a fine pro, but he just doesn't have the coverage chops. And especially if you're going to get all these targets directed at you, I think that's a guy that you could really take advantage of in the back end.
That's interesting, for sure. And the one thing I noticed when I watched Denver's game back against Vegas is like they play fast, like they're physical. They're
so fast.
Even these DBs are all over the place. Even 27s, like he's up in run support. Like they are not afraid. But yes, Jacoby Myers absolutely cooked, and Jahan Dotson is a lot better than Jacoby Myers. With all due respect to Jacoby Myers, who's a good receiver. I
will say, I don't know if Jacoby Myers went to like some receiver camp this offseason. I've always liked him, but he looked like he took it up. Like there was at points in the game, when you're on all 22, the numbers are a little blurry. You're like, is that Adams? You're like, oh no, that's Jacoby. You know what I mean? And so like they both got dreads now, so they look kind of similar. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, on the fuzzy tape, it's hard to tell apart.
Right. And but so like. He's a good football player, man. I think he's a perfect 2, and like obviously here we have, Batman and Robin, we got Terry and Jahan. And so like, can our 2, like capitalize on the matchup the way Jacoby did? Or do they kind of change their coverage structure to match him? Because like in addition to like the back end, I think Las Vegas kind of approached that game with a very, very different mindset than what I would have thought. They got out there in like 21 personnel, 22 personnel, 12 personnel, and they were like, we are running the damn ball. So you did get a little bit easier coverage structure or more challenging coverage structure because all of those underneath players are now like really aggressive to run support. So he was on a little bit more of an island. So does EB adopt that, or does he kind of stick with his like spread out approach and say, we'll find these same matchups, but from a spread formation? I think there's probably, there's costs and benefits to both, but when you're in that tight formation, it really is like he's by himself. You know what I mean? Like that player's on an island a little bit more. So it'd be interesting to see if they take anything from that Las Vegas.
Yeah, Vegas was tight a lot of stacks, a lot of bunches with very short splits. Again, the extra tight ends on the wings, all those kinds of stuff. And, that doesn't exactly play to Washington's personnel strength. They do have obviously Cole Turner and Logan Thomas, but you want to get Curtis Samuel on the field as often as possible. And how are you doing that if you're in 22-12? You're not. It is worth mentioning Curtis does have a hip that popped up on the injury report. He's only limited on a Wednesday, which means he's probably playing. He's probably fine. But just worth noting at this point. The question I would have for you on this, though, on the back end stuff when it comes to the Washington offense is how does, like, if you're coaching Sam up this week and you're like, all right, there's this guy in the back, Simmons. He's going to be everywhere. Sam's never played a safety like this. So how do you coach him up to make sure that, career interception 21 doesn't come against Sam Howell because Sam just doesn't realize that he's going to be able to fly down from the post or wherever he is and get his hands on a ball?
I think there's a couple ways. Like one of the things that I liked about Las Vegas's game plan is the way they would shift. So basically, like what Vance Joseph's defense is, I think at its core, it's a split safety look, right? What they do is they kind of do stuff that is similar to what the Commanders do, where there's not like a strong and a weak safety. So like with motion, you don't have one guy like run with the motion and get set up in a new spot. You just rock and roll it. Like, so you roll down and then you've got the numbers that you want in run support. And so I think what they did is they kind of were like, we're going to make Simmons be the run player. Like, he's a good run player, but he's not, we prefer him there as opposed to in the post making plays on the football. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way to kind of handle that problem. Is like, hey man, we're going to make him fit a lot of runs and he's not going to be able to like get where he's got to go. The other thing is I'd say is, so that's one way schematically that I thought Las Vegas did a good job of kind of dealing with him. I will also say, like with good football players, you can't really account for it until you see it. You can't really account for the speed, their instincts until you see it a couple times. And I think maybe there's a good way of kind of saying, hey, like we can show Simmons a bunch of different looks. We can show him a bunch of different formations, but let's kind of steer clear of his side of the field for the first couple reps until we get a beat on exactly like how he's playing the game. And we can give the quarterback some information and intel and basically be like, hey man, like, this is how he's playing this stuff. We think this throw's there. Let's try to hit this next time. If it's not there, let's hit the check down, and then just remind him that the windows are going to be smaller against good coverage players like that. So don't be afraid to check the ball down. Like we, on one of the sacks when on the interception, from the Arizona game, we both mentioned how Antonio Gibson's like wide open over the ball. And so even though that home run throws there against these better coverage structures against Patrick Surtain, like clock's going off, the rush is there, just check the ball down to the back, live to play another day. And then we can go a couple plays and call that same play again when we feel like it's time. So I would say just like, we talked about Sam maturing as a player. I think this is a good game to kind of just remind him, hey man, like you don't need to make every throw. You don't need to make every play. We'll talk about the Denver offense in a second, but they're super conservative, or they were in this game. So we don't need to press as much as you probably think. We can play the long game and win a tight scoring game here is what I would say. So just reminding him of that stuff, I think is the best way to deal with some of these more dynamic coverage players is say, hey, you don't need to win it every single throw. Take your time.
Yeah, you go to the Alex Smith school. You can't go broke making a profit.
Right.
And
people
that's the way to go
hate
sometimes.
on Alex. People hate on Alex Smith, but like he was a good pro for a long time, and because he took
won a lot of football games that way.
Yeah.
You can absolutely go broke giving away the game to Justin Simmons. So that's no bueno. Take those checkdowns, keep it going, and go from there. The other thing that I noticed watching the Vegas Denver game that I think is an area of potential concern is Garoppolo got the ball out really fast. And Denver was not afraid to pressure. Like they've got some talent up front, as we'll talk about with Clark and Gregory and some of these guys as rushers, but they also will bring pressure and they'll do it. Like there was one that they went, probably a 7-man pressure. I didn't go back and like rewatch it, but
it was a zero. I think it was a 3rd and 1 or something like that.
Well, I was going to say on a 1st and 10.
Oh, was it? They had one on 3rd and 1 as well.
Yeah, there was like a 7-man. It might have even been 8-man pressure on 1st and 10. And you're like, what the hell? Who does that? And so Vance Joseph will scheme some stuff up. And Garoppolo, who this is kind of what has kept him in the league, is super smart and is able to decipher that stuff.
He also has one of the fastest releases in the NFL.
Yeah. And so he gets the ball out, where Sam, obviously last week, that was an issue, holding the ball a little bit too long. And that's just naturally going to be an issue for a younger quarterback. The recognition is not going to happen as quickly because he doesn't have the file that Garoppolo has. So again, like if you're coaching up Sam / scheming up for Sam, how do you try to prepare him to get the ball out quickly without, falling into his own blitz and throwing a pick that way?
Well, I think that it's so, like, for example, let's talk about the front a little bit in conjunction with this blitz stuff, kind of set the table. So they're a 3-4 structure, very similar to Arizona, right? They're built a little different. I'd say they've got kind of like these more athletic bodies inside, as opposed to traditional 3-4, where you get the 330-pound 4-eye, the 360-pound nose, and they're in there just crushing double teams. These guys are a little bit more athletic, so they can do some more stuff, and they play a little bit faster, like you alluded to, right? The first thing I try to do is just get them out of that base structure. I don't want them in that structure as much as possible. Like, so I'm saying, like, because like all their blitz, most of their blitzes came out of that structure, right? And one of the reasons that structure is so good for blitzing is because if you think about a 3-4, and this is going to get really football nerdy, so just hold on to your horses here for a second. So they are a 3-4 base personnel, but they get into 4-down structures with the 3-4 personnel. So what they call like a 37 front, for example. So where they would shade the backside 4-eye to a 3 technique and move the nose to a shade on the front side, right? So they kind of just changed the spacing, which is very challenging for unfit. So if I'm EB, if I'm a coach, and they can do all this different stuff, because Wade Phillips he's from the Wade Phillips tree, and they do a great job of kind of using this 3-4 personnel, changing the fronts. And as an offensive player, especially in the run game, it becomes a little bit challenging identifying and targeting some of this stuff. So I want them out of that. And the best way to get them out of it is get into like 11 personnel, spread it out a little bit. So a couple things happen, right? You get them in a better personnel grouping, a simpler personnel grouping. And when you spread it out, sometimes it's easier for the quarterback to identify pressure looks, right? Because like that nickel who's over the slot guy, to time the blitz up, has to kind of creep a little bit early, right? Because the time and distance is better. So I think that's, if I was going to guess, I think that's what EB would do, is kind of spread them out, right? Limit kind of the confusion of having like a tight box. But I do think there are advantages to both. Like some people, like we just talked about, like when you tighten the box up, you get better looks at the one-on-one matchups on the perimeter. So there's pros and cons to both. But if I was him, I'd probably, and I guess I'd probably do, now that I'm talking through it with you, because this question, we didn't rehearse it, I'd probably do a little bit of both. I'd probably be like, hey, man, let's get in this in heavy and throw. Let's get in 11 and 10 and run the football a little bit and kind of give Sam some answers in terms of how he can see some of these structures and simplify the structures for the offensive line. I'd also probably go a little bit of tempo, you know what I mean? Again, because it's harder for the coordinator to call in stuff from the sideline. And they go fast anyway. But those are some things I'd probably really key in on this week and be like, hey, man, let's see if we can emphasize these points a little bit to kind of make it easier for Sam. Because you're right. Like we talked about the front, those two linebackers inside, I think one's name is, let me look it up, Singleton and Judy, or it's kind of a funny name.
Jewel. Josie Jewell.
Yeah, Josie Jewell. There we go. Are
old JJ.
Excellent. Singleton was excellent in this game, just in terms of scraping and fitting runs and fast. He's in coverage windows. Like he was awesome. He was awesome to watch. And so having those two guys inside, again, kind of coupled with the back end, like you got to kind of, I think you got to just try to either spread them out, or you kind of say to yourself, we have a more athletic offensive line than Las Vegas, so we can get to those second level blocks a little bit better. So I'm just really curious to see how they solve this puzzle, especially given that EB is so new as the coordinator. Like, what are his tools? What are his plans? Like, and I was talking to Fred and Santana, and we were like, man, it was a little simple in terms of like pre-snap stuff, And Fred immediately was like, he probably doesn't want to put too much on the quarterback. So how much do they add this week to kind of say, hey, Sam, like this is going to really help us, and see if Sam can handle it. So I think this is really compelling for all of that stuff. You know what I mean? But yeah, like in terms of the blitz question specifically, I think you probably see him just knowing what EB's done so far, spread it out a little bit and see if you can get some tells pre-snap.
So two things. One, it is worth mentioning that EB is very familiar with Vance Joseph because
Yes.
obviously he was the head coach in Denver previously, and Kansas City, Denver, divisional rivals. And so they saw him 2 times a year. So there is a lot of familiarity there. Nevertheless, this is a defense that's kind of been around the league. There's that Wade Phillips tree isn't exactly small at this point, considering how long Wade was around and how good he was. So there are, like, it's not like it's new to EB, even if it's very new to Sam. You did mention something that I kind of want to go back to that we didn't really talk about on the last pod, but that is key to what you just said, which is EB's play calling. Like, we talked a little bit about the run pass balance, but there was I guess there was a lot of people that were saying it was much simpler than they thought. Like, oh my God, I thought we were going to get 78 jet motions and reverses and whatever. And it's like, yeah, you probably will get some of that stuff, but like, it was Arizona. You didn't need, and it was week one. And all due respect, like, you don't need to empty the clip week one against Arizona and put everything you got on tape. Like, you never do that anyway. It's 1 week. There's only so many plays you can call. But like, as you were watching it, was the offense simpler than you thought, or you think that's a narrative that's a little overstated? Because they did run Curtis Samuel once. There was, some jet motion, although not a lot. There wasn't maybe as much motion as we thought. There was a lot of different, formations and things like that. Different guys lining up different places, but perhaps it wasn't as fancy, if you will, as the maximal version of this, what we saw in Kansas City.
And what I would say is I probably agree with that to a certain extent. But what I will say is I felt like it didn't negatively affect the drop back passing stuff. I actually thought the drop back passing stuff, when you watch the All-22, was pretty clean, in terms of windows and throwing lanes. And that defense, that Philadelphia defense it's not Philadelphia, but Jonathan Gannon's defense from Philadelphia. They tend to play simpler coverage structures, right? It's like kind of they give you underneath stuff. And I thought they pressured and simulated pressure a little bit more than they would traditionally. But at its core, it was that. So it's just about really finding those open spaces. And you're not going to manipulate it the same way. I'm sure you could, but it's not as necessary as it is with some other teams. And also, I think, like, this is maybe the most important thing. Like, the play caller and the offense is still so new. And you have to kind of work that verbiage and work that communication in a way that is is effective, right? Because if I could put all this stuff in the world, but if the guys don't know it and they don't understand like why we're doing it and the benefit of it, it really doesn't. It's a net negative, because it makes them play slowly. And so I think kind of coming in against a team like Arizona with a relatively simplistic game plan and basically being like, let's go get it. You know what I'm saying? Let's make it happen.
Got the EB from training camp. Go get it.
Every
single snap.
I think that's there's a lot of benefit to that. Like,
that's a joke for people that were at training camp and at training camp only.
But yeah, I think like it was like what was I going to say? Like, it's like Kyle. This is a really good example. Kyle used to put in. He'd go through these phases where his brain is just he's big brain football, and he'd put in run, check to another run, check to a pass, then like on third down, we'd have all these different, and his goal is to get you in the best position to be successful. But there's so much volume of offense in it, just kind of clouds the picture. And he was aware of that. He said that. He's like, we just put too much too soon, and it was too complicated. We got to kind of stick with the basics and be okay with running into bad looks for a while until guys really own the principles of these kind of basic runs. And I think there's an element of that going on here. I don't know. I haven't talked to EB, but I would assume that's what's happening. And again, like when you watch the All-22, like it was pretty effective, the offense, and the drop back passing stuff and the intermediate stuff. So yes, was it simpler than I thought? Do I think there are potential reasons for it? 100%. And do I think it's going to get more complicated as the season goes and opponent dependent? Yes, I do.
Yeah. So we'll see. I think that's definitely something to watch. Trick it up a little bit. It's also the kind of thing that, like, the jet pass or the jet sweep stuff, like, you can get Terry more touches that way. Something they didn't necessarily need to do or didn't feel like they needed to do against Arizona. So we'll see as they scheme it up this weekend against Denver. Anything else? Washington offense, Denver defense.
Washington offense, Denver defense. Not really. The one thing that Santana brought up the other day when I was talking to him is, he said, like, it'd be interesting to see if they take Surtain and match him up with Jahan. As they kind of identify him as the more dangerous weapon at this point, or if they do any matching at all. But I think that's something to keep an eye on, is how they decide to play this receiver group with their secondary, because if they do play in a specific way, like that's a matchup in terms of Jahan on 27 or Terry on 27 that if I'm EB, I'm looking to exploit.
I was going to say, if I am Bieniemy, please, Lord, put Surtain on Jahan. Not because like I'm like, oh yeah, take Jahan out, because Jahan's really important to this offense and Surtain's great and can kind of do that to guys, but disrespect Terry and see how that goes. The way that dude competes, and he's going to get some balls. Yeah. I think the question becomes, though, with a guy like Simmons, can you take Surtain, put him on Dotson, and say, all right, you're on an island over here, and we're gonna, Belichick used to do this at times where he'd take his number 2 corner on the number 1 receiver, and then say, we're just gonna give that guy safety help all the time. So it's 2-on-1 on the best guy, 1-on-1 on the second best guy, but it's with your best guy, and hope that plays out. Obviously, that it only works in certain situations because you're running different coverages, and are you in man, are you in zone, are you in this, are you in that? Formationally, EB can do some things to try to free that up and make it more difficult. Obviously, Washington also has more weapons, whether that's Logan Thomas, Cole Turner, Curtis Samuel, the backs. Yeah. There are solutions to everything, but as a base kind of fundamental strategy, I think that is a very, very interesting chess game in terms of how you approach that.
Yeah, and we'll see what they end up doing, but I think, and I think that's a great point about the safety help. Like they as much as offenses evolve week to week, defenses evolve week to week. And I think when you look at it, you say they only gave up 17 points. Like that was a really solid performance by them to an offense. Say what you want about Russell Wilson. We'll talk about them in a second. Like it was pretty efficient. You know what I mean? Like it was pretty efficient from a completion percentage standpoint. Like I think they're being too conservative, but despite kind of giving up 100 yards receiving, like they were able to kind of to Jacoby Myers, like they were able to manage the offensive production and make plays when they need to. The interception in the red zone, all that kind of stuff. So it is a very, let's not get it twisted. Maybe this is the most important thing. This is a very good defense. Like this is a very fast defense. It's a very physical defense. It is a very different challenge and perspective than it was last week. So really curious to see what the plan is, and I do think that their defense's relationship, Denver's defense's relationship to the offense, is something that I think is really interesting in terms of how EB calls this game. Because when the other offense is a little bit conservative, does EB get a little bit more conservative and say, let's make this a defensive special teams game more, because of some of these concerns about some of the pieces they have in the back end, for example?
Definitely. And the last thing I'll mention here, just kind of popped into my head as we were talking about it, is this: you have the crowd situation, which you talked about in the last pod, where it's like, Denver's crowd matters. Actually, no, sorry, you didn't tell us about it in the last pod. We recorded a bunch of stuff the other day. Take 5 that's out tomorrow is Logan's Denver stories, and small preview. Denver's crowd is really loud and matters.
Really loud,
They are 0-1 on the year. So there's a level of desperation that you cannot fake.
100%.
And last but not least, if to kind of bring the crowd back into it, they are honoring one of John Elway's Super Bowl champions, I believe, at halftime teams.
Really?
So John Elway going to be in the house, like people there excited to celebrate that. So the crowd should be pretty juiced on Sunday, which is another factor, obviously, when your offense is on the field, something Sam Howell has never dealt with. This is his first road start. Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. If you haven't already, subscribe to our podcast. We'd love for you to do so, not just for us, but for your own benefit. Don't miss a pod. You can do that on your favorite podcast platform, including on YouTube, where full episodes are on 1067 The Fans page. And if you are watching on 1067 The Fans page, go ahead and hit that like button so that people know, that you liked it, or at least that someone did. They don't know that it's you. It's anonymous. Just go ahead and hit it. And then other people will get to see it, because YouTube's algorithm will be like, hey, good stuff there. All right. Very interesting week for Russell Wilson last week. First week as Sean Payton's quarterback. What did you make of what they did schematically? Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator there, a guy that you've watched quite a bit of tape on before. So how does what Peyton and Lombardi want to do fit with what Russell Wilson can do at this point in his career and what was ultimately a 16-point performance in their debut.
Yeah, I ultimately got the sense that they were like, we don't want Russ. We don't like, like that. Everyone's like, we want Russ to cook.
Yeah, let Russ cook. Do not let Russ cook. Do not let Russ near the stove. No grilling for Russell.
That's right. He's doing like they do not want him leveraged at all. He gosh, like lots of kind of roll passes, lots of play action, lots of run game, lots of quick game, and this is kind of this was his plan. This was his model to kind of correct Jameis Winston when he was coordinating for Jameis Winston, and it worked really well. Like Jameis Winston's touchdown interception ratio went from the worst in the NFL to like pretty serviceable, like just in one 5-game stretch with Sean Payton. And so this philosophy does work for him, especially for a team like last year that was pretty bad. Like they're going to lean on the defense, they're going to play a field position game, and they're going to rely on Russ to make plays in kind of specific situations. So despite kind of saying, Russ, you will never cook, he did make some plays in the red zone that I thought were really, really good, right? So Max Crosby, probably top 3 edge rusher in the NFL at this point. He is outstanding.
He is ridiculous, man.
He's going against Mike McGlinchey, beats him inside, and Russ just kind of sidesteps, soft roll to the right, finds somebody, touchdown. Next time they're in the red zone on the other side of the field, I think it's the fourth quarter, same thing. Crosby tries to rush inside. Russ steps out of the pocket, finds somebody, touchdown. So he still does have some kind of mobility and ability to evade and extend plays. It's just when you watch him, it's definitely not to the same caliber that it was, 3 years ago when he was like really balling in Seattle, or 5 years ago, 10 years ago when he was like kind of at the peak of his powers. He's still. So I'll put it this way: compare him to Josh Dobbs, and it's not even close, right? So like this defense is going to be facing a very unique challenge. I do think the pacing of the game will feel very similar to what Arizona brought in, right? They didn't want Josh Dobbs making any kind of big throws or making any big mistakes. I think it's the same thing with Russell Wilson, but you do have a better playmaking piece back there. And I think this offense does a really good job of kind of body punch, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like lulled into this false sense of security, and they take a shot. So, for example, they were around the 40-yard line, which is a good time to take a shot if you're an offense. They take it's a play action pass. Cortland Sutton, who's like their only healthy receiver at the moment, beats the corner, is wide open, and Russ just overthrows it. So, like they do have this. They do have explosive playmaker. We'll see if Jerry Jeudy plays. We're recording this on Thursday, so who knows? But Greg Dulcich, who was another guy who was very explosive for that offense, has a hamstring. He's out. Like they don't have a lot of explosive pieces, but I think Cortland Sutton is probably definitely a top 20 receiver in the NFL, maybe top 15. And like he can make plays for you if you have to. Big, long strider, but like that is still a feature of what they want to do. They're going to kind of bore you to death, and then all of a sudden they get one or two, and then all of a sudden it's 21 to 14 or whatever, and you're looking up at a different score than it was against the Las Vegas Raiders. So they don't want Russ cooking. They're trying to manage him as much as they can, but he still has the ability to make plays, and I think that's something that this defense needs to be acutely aware of. Is like they're gonna run the ball at you. They're gonna do some misdirection stuff. It's gonna be his average depth of target, I think, was like 2.4 yards or something insane. It's like he barely passed the line of scrimmage. So like just to give you an idea of what's going on with them, but it's a different animal than Josh Dobbs, and Joe Lombardi, Sean Payton, they know how to find shots. So that's something I'd say just kind of be aware of if you're watching this game.
Yeah. The difference of Jerry Jeudy is pretty significant. So all of a sudden you have Jeudy and Sutton, and you're like, oh, okay, well, this just became more difficult. And you talk about the ability to create shots. Like Jerry Jeudy just creates shots one-on-one because he's Jerry Jeudy. Like he's a tremendous route runner with great speed. We'll see what he can do from that speed standpoint with the hamstring injury. But he was limited in practice on Wednesday and told reporters that he is trending towards playing on Sunday. So that would obviously be a pretty dynamic game changer. But the other thing that I think I noticed about Wilson's performance against Vegas is it felt like nothing was on schedule. And so it is a go, and that's kind of his MO. I almost felt like it was worse than usual.
Which is
Or
weird because
maybe
that whole
worse than
offense
yeah.
is based on being on rhythm and being on the quick game.
Russ's rhythm is like stand back there, feel like you're supposed to do something, and then run out of the pocket and find somebody's sidearm. And he's still good at that. And and I just think there is a level of discipline and patience that this defense is going to have to play with that is very different than Josh Dobbs for sure. Or like when Josh Dobbs got out of the pocket, you're like, all right, really good time to see if we can make a play here because he's going to miss some safety, a linebacker coming from the backside, like, whatever it is, or, but we'll see. And this is where like a guy like Montez Sweat's skill set is so important, because if you try to run away from Montez Sweat, you're not actually going to get away. And that's going to be interesting to see, Russell Wilson, when he breaks the pocket, does he intentionally run away from Montez Sweat? Like how does that other side work? Do you see a little bit more Casey Tuhill, a little bit faster player this week, and especially in passing situations? There's like a lot of things there, but the patience and discipline element of this defense is going to have to be on its P's and Q's this weekend, because your scramble rules, because all the kind of discipline-y stuff as plays get extended is going to become really important. And obviously on schedule is important as well, but Russ is a guy that looks to break the pocket. He looks to get out and make plays more than he does stand in there and try to find something late in the down.
Yeah, and you're right. Like that's what he wants to do, and this offense is not. It's not for him really. It was just such, like, you could just tell they were like, no, Russ, don't do that. Like let's like limit your creativity as much as possible. And again, like, I kind of think that's warranted based on last year's performance from him. So I kind of understand what they're doing, but I also think there's a balance here, and I think they walked that really well with just Jameis Winston when he was in New Orleans. Is, again, it was super conservative, but like the thing that makes Jameis Winston awesome is he's not afraid to take a shot. He's not afraid to be aggressive. And so they'd give him like 4 or 5 opportunities in a game where it was like, go be yourself. And he would do something crazy. He'd throw a pick or he'd throw a touchdown. It was like very, polarizing, but I think they need to adopt more of that with Russell, because again, there's times when he's escaping the pocket and and the back's wide open in front of him, and he just floats the ball over the dude's head. And it's like, that would have been a 15-yard gain. So obviously there are plays to be made for him. There are opportunities for the offense to be more efficient than it was against Las Vegas. But I think there's a lot of stuff going on with Russ, and it just really, that offense is right now is trying to be Russ proof as opposed to supporting Russ in a way that you've seen other offenses do in the past. So
yeah. The offensive line and pass protection.
Yes.
I don't know whether they're good or not, because Max Crosby's so good, he makes everyone look bad.
Yeah.
But what did you see from the offensive line and pass pro? Then we should definitely talk about Denver's running game, because I think they're going to run it a lot.
I think so too.
And they've got some really talented backs, obviously
100%.
starting with Javonte Williams. But to finish off kind of the pass portion of this, how is Denver's offensive line and pass pro?
Well, they went out and spent a lot of money this offseason to kind of improve that group. They've got Mike McGlinchey playing right tackle, who again was in San Francisco and is a very good player. Like I'm trying to think of where I'd rank him. He's probably a top 12 right tackle in the NFL. He's very good, and I think he did a really good job against Crosby. Like, Crosby got him because Crosby gets everybody. But I thought, like, on those 2 touchdown plays I described, like, to keep in phase with a guy who can kind of do whatever he wants and rush how he wants was really good job by him. They also signed Ben Powers from Baltimore. He was another huge free agent signing, like a $55 million guard, which is, people aren't spending money like that on offensive linemen anymore. But he's known to be a better pass protector than a run blocker, big, kind of 350, 360 pound kind of guy. And then they got Garrett Boyles, who again is, been a little bit up and down, but when he's up, he's a top 5 player at the position. Like, he's in that same conversation with like Trent Williams, and he's not in that first tier of like Trent, Tristan Wirfs, like maybe Lane Johnson. He's a little bit below that, but he's always a very very kind of, when he's on. And I thought he played really well. Quisenberry is the center, is a guy that has kind of been a little bit of a journeyman, but has a reputation for being a solid player. And then, do you remember the guy from the Senior Bowl a couple of years ago? I don't remember his name. Let me look it up real quick. He always had his belly out, his big belly.
It feels like that's a lot of guys at the Senior Bowl.
True.
I'm talking about Quinn Manners.
Yeah, Quinn Manners.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of the other guy.
Wisconsin Whitewater's finest.
Yeah, there we go. And he played the whole Senior Bowl with a broken hand, so good for him. So tough, kind of gritty guy, really good athlete. So I think that group's pretty good, and I think they're better than what we saw against Arizona. So I'm really, really excited to see what our defensive line does against this group, because again, this is not the best offensive line in the NFL, but I think they're pretty darn good, and I think they're pretty effective. And I think they're pretty good in pass pro. And I thought, like, when you watch the game down to down, like, because, obviously Max Crosby's there, but there's also in Las Vegas, there's also the first round pick from Texas Tech who's there too.
Yeah, Tyree Wilson.
Tyree Wilson, who is a big, freaky looking dude. And he rushed a couple times against Boyles, and Boyles did a great job kind of understanding what he was trying to do and containing him. So I really do believe this group is significantly better than what we saw. And I want to know if this defensive line can be dominant against a group like this, because they're dominant against last week against a group they should have been dominant against, but this group is a little bit different. Even the tight ends, like Manhertz, the tight end, there is a blocking tight end. He was in I think he was in Carolina last year, or Jacksonville.
He's definitely played in Carolina. I don't know.
Yeah, he was originally in Carolina. I think he was in Jacksonville for a year, but he's like one of the best blocking tight ends in the NFL. He's basically an extension of the O line. Like, this is a very different kind of challenge. Like the Denver Broncos, they want to run the football. They want to be physical. They want to get after guys. And then in those passing situations, because of that kind of quick game, because of the play action, it makes rushers less effective. But I also think they're a very talented group. So in terms of matchups, like, circle that one, because that's a big one. Because, like, the defensive line basically took over the game last week. And can they do the same thing this week would be my question to the team and to them, is like, can you do it versus a group that I think is better?
Well, and how you rush against Russ is obviously super important, because
100%.
we talked about, he wants to get out of the pocket, and we talked about how good James Smith-Williams in particular is at setting that edge and keeping things in front of him, and then setting up, Allen and Payne and Sweat to be able to eat, just kind of push his guy towards those three monsters and see what you can get. And the way Sweat rushes is very disciplined, but also highly effective, has a sack and a half last week. So I think keeping those edges and making sure that Russ doesn't have the windows to escape in the first place, especially, and just like make Russ beat you on time. And if he does within the timing of the offense, like, congratulations, man. Sean Payton's going to be thrilled. But making sure that he doesn't get out and do the Russ stuff, I think is really important. And obviously the back end will help with that, because he just doesn't see very well down the field. Like,
it seems that way. And
small guy who's trouble seeing over the offensive line. He's had ways in his career of creating throwing windows, but he loves to get out and be off schedule. And, the more you can keep him in, the less he can see. He's just staring at the back of helmets.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that the 2 touchdowns are when he breaks the pocket, in the red zone. So, like, can you be disciplined in those situations? And again, like, to your point, like, it's going to be a huge feature of the game is containing him in the pocket and just manage, because I don't think he's the same playmaker that he was, but he still can hurt you. And I really want to drive that point home. Like, he is a much better quarterback than Josh Dobbs. This offense is much better than Arizona's offense. This defense is much better than Arizona's defense. This is a totally different animal. So can this team, the Commanders, learn from the mistakes they made, or learn from Arizona, and kind of match the intensity of this first road trip against a team that I think their record might not be great, but they're a good football team. They're a good football team. So I'm really this is going to be a very interesting test for this group.
Russ completed basically 80% of his passes last week. So, like, they didn't go anywhere, but he's
that's the intent of the offense.
Stuff.
That's the intent, right? It's like, find short stuff that you get the ball to your hand quick, and where he doesn't have to, like, he's not throwing interceptions or taking sacks or taking negative plays, because this is a comprehensive team offense. And what I mean by that is, like, you're not calling the game as an offensive coordinator only. You're calling it in conjunction with your defense, understanding that your defense is going to hold this team to 17 points or whatever, And I think it's perfectly reasonable after watching them play week 1. Like, that is a very talented group. So it's not just me scoring as many points as I can. It's me understanding we've got a really good defense. Let's use that as a tool so that we're not over leveraging ourselves offensively.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so that brings us to the running backs, because part of, kind of the transition here is the guy who had the most catches for them last week was Samaje Perine. And if you had told me in 2017, when I was covering Samaje Perine as a rookie here in Washington, that he would eventually be the leading receiver on a team in any game in his NFL career, I would have looked at you like you had 10 heads. I just looked this up real quick, Logan. This is a guy that had total in his 3 years at Oklahoma, 40 receptions. 15 as a freshman, 15 as a sophomore, 15 as a junior before leaving, or sophomore, junior, senior. I don't remember if he redshirted his freshman year. Point is, 3 years, 40 receptions, and 10. Yeah, he was a junior. 10 in his last year. He had 4 the other day. He has completely transformed himself and did that while he was in Cincinnati. They didn't even bother trying to use him out of the backfield when he was here. Cincinnati kind of becomes their third down back.
Right.
And now he is in that role again behind a very, very good first and second down back who can catch the ball a little bit as well in Javonte Williams. The Denver run game is actually the thing that I think is scarier than, obviously, Russ can create big shots. That is scary. And if Jerry Jeudy is back, that is scary. But I think the big test, especially considering how the linebackers played last week, and Cody Barton in particular, is going to be this run game for Denver.
Yeah, and I think it's also important it kind of speaks to their offensive philosophy. I think they had, Will, if you could double check me on this, I think they had 52 or 56 offensive snaps. There were 21 rushing attempts by backs, and I think the backs had 6 catches. So over half of their offense was running backs. You know what I mean? Like, it's that thing. Just let that sink in for a second. Like, so much of what they're doing is going to go through this position group because of this conservative offensive philosophy. And you mentioned Devontae Williams. He had the highest broken tackle percentage of any player coming out of college. He's coming off the ACL. He doesn't look great. 64 offensive snaps. Thank you. But so, yeah, about half of what they were doing was through the running backs, which is crazy to think about that. Anyway, but he's a very physical runner. He's a big guy. He breaks tackles. He's got good vision. And they are going to give him the ball a ton. So I would expect Jack Del Rio to be like, let's get in Cinco. If they're going to get out here in 12 personnel and 21 personnel, let's get in Cinco. Let's build a wall. Let's let these guys make a bunch of tackles, and let's make them punt. Because, there's a reason that analytics are kind of shying away from running the football like this. It's not overly efficient. And when you look at Javonte Williams carries, it's like, here's a gain of 1, here's a gain of 2, here's a gain of 3. He'll bust one for 10, right? But on the whole, it's not an efficient philosophy. So if you can kind of capitalize on that defensively, you're going to be in a lot of 2nd and 9, 2nd and 10, 2nd and 8s, and that's really advantageous for Jack. So can you capitalize on this conservative offensive philosophy and say, if they're going to run the ball so consistently on first down, let's make sure that we're ready and prepared for it. And I think this group is totally ready for it, and give ourselves opportunities later in this down distance sequence to be more effective.
Yeah, Vegas did a good job of keeping, making sure there's no explosives in the run game. The longest carry they had was 12 from Perine, and I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, that was on like a 3rd and 33, where they just run a draw and he gets like 12 yards, and it's like, okay, cool, it's 3rd and 17 now, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And actually, I think it was like literally 3rd and 33, and so it was like 4th and 20 something by the time they're done. It's like, cool, you got your 12-yard carry, helps your average. Perine averages 5.1 on the day on his 8 carries. But in terms of actual down distance, efficacy, not really doing a lot in that department. Javonte Williams, 13 carries, 52, a 4-yard average, but his long was 11. And that's the thing, is like, you can't give up the explosives in the run game. Just keep them on track. If they want to run it, fine. But you gotta keep them on track. And so, making sure that Barton is a little faster to the ball, I think is obviously going to be key. He's got to be on top of that, but also, with the team and with Russ, who's going to hit you with some play action, who's going to boot away from, where everybody's going, you got to be on top of it. And that to me is like the concerning part, is the stress on the second level of the defense. Obviously, if Cam Curl is playing on the second level, I feel better about it. Sure. But that is the kind of, obviously, look, hey, first level of the defense can take care of the running stuff. Great. If they don't ever break through, and you got John Allen, Deron Payne making a bunch of tackles, and Montez Sweat making a bunch of tackles, fantastic. But the stress that they potentially could put on the second level, I think, is the biggest concerning point for me potentially this weekend.
No, I agree. I think, but like Jamin had an excellent game. It'll be interesting to see. I also think it'll be interesting to see how they handle Cody and the green dot this week, because I thought Jamin played.
Do you think they could switch it as soon as this week?
I don't know. I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on that. Like, I don't think they would do that, but I'm always a guy that kind of like lets people play it out. I just think Jamin played really well, and I think he needs to be on the field more because he played. That's how. And I'm a big fan of Jamin, but like I think everyone agrees with me. If you watch his plays, he looks like a different dude than he did last year. He looks like the guy from the second half of last year, which is what we thought he would do. So I think that player needs to be on the field more.
So I haphazardly went on a mini rant yesterday about this on the radio show, on Wednesday's show, which is the biggest, like outside of not having figured out quarterback yet, the biggest issue of the Ron Rivera era in terms of staying in kind of this mediocre 7 to 10 or 7 to 9 win range is resource allocation. Yeah. And the misuse of resources. And it
you go on rants every once in a while, crazy rants once in a while. This sounds like a legitimate one, but it's so funny. Like this is like it just seems like just kind
certain things bother me, man.
I know.
This is one of them. And you know what it started with though, and kind of what really triggered it was him just saying, "Yeah, Cameron's working it out on the snaps," and it's like they traded up for a long snapper,
right?
And they're giving this long snapper, who they traded up for, all the chances in the world at a position where you can just go find a guy who can do the job. And Cam's out there. All due respect to Cameron Cheeseman, I hope he figures it out. Like, I'm not wishing for this dude to lose his job because he's a human being and he deserves that respect. But like, it's not that hard to find another long snapper. That's just the position. Middle linebacker, a position that you don't typically use first-round picks on. They figured Jamin Davis is special enough, or linebacker, not just middle linebacker.
Yeah.
Jamin is special enough that we're going to use a first-round pick on him. And 3 years in, as he is getting better and better and better and has turned into a pretty good football player,
right,
you're cutting his snaps to 60%? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I understand you signed Barton in free agency, but it's not like you signed him for big money. How about you take the guy that you spent a first-round pick on to be a cornerstone of your franchise and you put him on the bleeping field? Like, that, to me, it's just not that hard. And also, he's better. So that's my take on it.
Right now, he's for sure better. And again, maybe you don't feel like Jamin can do the green dot. I think he did it the last couple of games of the year, but also Cam does it. And so, like, I don't know. So that again, I'm not trying to, like say that Cody shouldn't be playing or whatever, but I just think after one game, which is again a very small sample size, Jamin had a really good game and Cody kind of did not have a very good game. So I want the guy who's playing better to be on the field more if I can help it. Now, let's give Cody an opportunity to kind of turn the corner here and play better football, all those kind of things. But that's something I'd be really curious to see, like how they handle that over the next couple of weeks. Like if Cody doesn't start playing better, like what do they end up doing?
I agree with you. I think the best case scenario for this team right now is if Barton can play better, because then you get your two best guys on the field, right? Theoretically, Barton's one of your best two. Barton and Davis together, great. And the other problem is, like, if Barton is your mic and your signal caller, taking him off the field becomes more complicated.
Right.
So do you want Jamin, even if I guess you could obviously give Cam the green dot and have him call it, but like, do you want even beyond the actual functional part of the green dot, do you want Jamin bouncing inside outside, or do you want to because does that feel like overloading Jamin's plate, or is part of the reason he's being successful because he's playing that one linebacker spot?
That's a great point. Maybe that's exactly right. I don't know.
That's something that we don't have the information for. On a philosophical level, I go back to what I just said. I don't understand why you're setting it up so that your former first round pick isn't on the field all the time. But given the situation is what it is right now, definitely the best case scenario is to let Barton play through it and hope very, very quickly that he turns it on. But if he doesn't, I think you're right. Like, I think very quickly you have to make that change. Jamin has been too good for too long at this point to have him sitting on the sideline for 30% of snaps, because you're trying to get Cody Barton, figured out. Like, that just doesn't make sense.
And to be fair, like, you bring up a great point. Like, maybe he's, maybe he's better in that role, in that capacity. Jamin, I'm talking about. Maybe he's better, kind of a little fresher, a little bit mentally fresher. I don't know, but he's playing good football. He played good football in the preseason, in training camp. Right now, he's playing good football. And again, like, I feel like, to your point, you want to see that freak athlete that you drive, 4'4", 40-inch vertical, all that stuff, those crazy long arms. Like, you want to see that blossom into the guy that is again like the cornerstone of the defensive group in addition to the defensive line. So him and then Cam, like you've got all these defensive pieces. It just is it's weird. Like they've done a really good job, I think, in the back end of finding ways to get Percy on the field, finding ways to get St. Juste on the field. Like they've been very creative in that capacity. And like one of the big criticisms of last year, one of the things that they said they wanted to get better is they didn't want Cam to play the Buffalo nickel as much. But here he is playing the Buffalo nickel. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. There's a lot of stuff. And again, it's one game. So like, let's not overreact to it. But that's something, again, if I'm keeping an eye on, especially this week against a team that's going to run the ball a ton, because I thought Cody actually was okay in terms of recognition of play, but he was getting stuck on blocks a little bit. And this week versus this O-line, he's going to get really stuck. You know what I'm saying? So like, does he improve? Does he get better and that stuff? And again, that's something like linebacker in this defense seems like it's very, very challenging, to be fair to him. And like we talked about that before. So, but can he kind of come along and make some plays? And I'm really curious to see that. But again, 2-3 weeks down the road, does this dynamic shift? And we'll see.
So that actually just popped an idea in my head. And don't drop your microphone. Hold on to your seat. What if they actually played a little bit of bass this week? Like what if this guy named Khaleke Hudson got some snaps? Now, they wouldn't do it in an actual base because that's not really in their playbook at this point. But in the idea of keeping Cam out of the Buffalo, I do wonder if they kind of put Khaleke in the Buffalo role if Denver's going to come out in a ton of heavy personnel, and at that point it's basically base. But, they have packages where Khaleke can be on the field. And so I do wonder a little bit bigger body, and that also has Cam coming down as the run support safety, which is nice. Yeah. Cam and Forrest as opposed to Percy. Now, Percy's pretty good in that role. You saw last week.
So, I think that's the problem you're running into is your best personnel grouping is your safeties now. So get as many of those guys on the field as you can. I think one of the things they said is they don't want Cam to get banged up. And so how do you mitigate some of those hits playing the Buffalo? Because he's excellent, man, dude. Like watching the game, he is an absolute animal. Like he's taking on pulling guards. He's cutting guys down. Like he's skating blocks. He's doing all this stuff that's really awesome. And you want that on the field as much as possible, but I also want that on the field for week 18. You know what I mean? I want it for the whole year as opposed to sporadically. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that too moving forward. Like how they handle his load, how they handle his reps.
I think the idea was that Quan was going to pick up some of that slack. And obviously Quan is, if people didn't see the injury report, Quan is DMP right now. He's in concussion protocol. But also the way he played in the preseason, and based off his snap count in week 1, which was 0 on defense, it's pretty clear that he's not ready for the big time yet.
Sure. And so we'll see how that all shakes out. Again, week 1, think about last year, week 1, and think about week 10 of last year. Like it was completely different team.
Gonna make the Pro Bowl.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be figured out, and guys have off weeks. And I think we'll see how they as we get more data points, we'll have more answers on this. But these are just some things that I think after week 1, we're all keeping an eye on defensively. Like we're all excited. It's a very talented group, and we're talking about little minutia here, but Cody Barton's development, Cam Crow's utilization, can he stay healthy? You know what I'm saying? And Chase playing on defense. All those things are things that are going to be really interesting to watch over the next couple of weeks. I don't think there's any disputing that it's a very talented group. We're really excited about that group. And so we can talk about some of these smaller, minute details and kind of see how it goes. But again, this week, they're not going to be challenged, down the field as much. It's going to be a very physical kind of rock'em sock'em robots type deal. And I think this group, has shown that they can handle that kind of thing. So.
Rock'em sock'em. That I feel like if we did podcast titles based off of quotes from the episode, it's going to be a Rock'em Sock'em Robots type deal. Would 100% be the title of this episode.
Just stand, they just stand, they just punch each other.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Face, pop, 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 pop. So that's what it is. No cover guarding. Just we're just punching each other in the face for 60
That's a Logan Paulson type of game right there. All right. Again, next time you'll hear from us will be Sunday, 1 p.m. We are at MGM National Harbor, broadcasting live for the Take Command pregame show. Your boy's officially out of quarantine, Logan, so I will be there. I am excited to be back out of my own home. I have sat in this exact chair. I actually haven't moved from this chair. All I've done is radio shows and podcasts from this chair. I don't even remember what my living room looks like. That's not true. But I'll see you guys on Sunday with Logan at Tap MGM Sports Bar, or Tap Sports Bar at MGM National Harbor. And of course, if you can't make it to join us there in Oxon Hill. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980 at 1067 The Fan, or listen on either radio station, either on the radio or on the free Odyssey app. Be back then Sunday night for our post-game pod, also live on all the digital platforms. We got to figure out the timing of that with the 425 game, so stay tuned to the social medias to know when that is going to happen. Logan's at Logan_Paulson82 on Instagram, and I am on Twitter at Craig Hoffman. And yes, I'm still calling it Twitter. All right, that's it for this show. See you next time. Peace out.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do
He's
it.
Very, very smart.